Yo, what's up? How's it going? Looks like everything's working today. Welcome to Hope of Resistance. My name is Aaron. I'm Aaron. I go by Aaron the Quill on YouTube and Threads and Twitter and pretty much everywhere at this point. I am coming to you today. I took a week off last week. I had a death in the family, and I just wasn't necessarily in the right headspace to hop on here and talk with you all. But I'm here today, and so we're gonna be looking around today. Today I want to do like a little bit of a shift. Usually I come on, I have a topic, and I have a topic today, but I have a topic, and I like to walk through the topic and all of the sources and everything that I've created for whatever it is that I'm going to talk about. And I still did a little bit of that today. I just kind of shifted it, I think, a little bit this time, because what I decided to do this time versus, in previous iterations is I just wanted to talk about something that I guess is almost kind of like a passion thing for me. And so one of the things that I notice whenever I'm looking around the internet and I'm paying attention to what the pundits are saying, and I'm listening to people on both sides, and I probably listen to more people that are right-leaning than I do left-leaning, because I really want to have a stronger understanding of what people on the right think. And I find myself in constant angst and rage watching them babble on about nonsense that I disagree with. And that's not to say that I don't watch left-leaning people too. I just tend to watch a lot more right. One of the things I found, though, is it seems like no matter what this administration does, no matter what, the right-leaning pundits will never, ever turn their back on Trump. They will never turn their back on what this administration represents. They will never, ever, nothing will ever sway them. And if you see me looking over here, it's because I am the podcaster and the engineer. And so I spend a lot of time engineering in the midst of also talking to you. So if you see me looking over, it's because I'm looking over at my OBS, so I can kind of make sure that I'm keeping tabs on stuff. Anyway, I just find it really interesting that it doesn't matter at all, ever, what the administration does. The pundits will always side with Trump. And I find it, I think I found it over time that it kind of lessens their credibility. If you really think about it, it does this thing where it's like, well, if he can never do any wrong and they're just always going to agree with him and reinforce him, then they're never going to be critical of him. Then that really doesn't even make them like credible sources of information. It just makes them loyalist. And so whenever we were picking up the name of the episode, I say we, because as you guys might know, Mom helps me with a lot of the production. And as we were picking up the topic for this week, one of the things that one of the titles that we came up with was this one, When Loyalty Replaces Credibility. And that's going to be the bulk of what we talk about. I didn't want to, I have already done a whole video on Kirk and Kirk's views and Charlie Kirk and his rise to stardom and success. And one of the things that I believed about Charlie, and one of the things that I believe about now Marjorie Taylor Greene and other people, is some people they bought into the grift genuinely. So in the case of Charlie Kirk, for example, he definitely, he did a lot, and him and Turning Point USA did a lot, right? It basically, because Turning Point USA, which was founded by Kirk, it basically it like doubled in its influence because of the rise of Trump. And it's really interesting whenever you think about it, because by like 31, because that's whenever by 31 Kirk had built a direct line to Trump, and he had grown Turning Point USA into like a $92 million a year operation. And I just think it's crazy whenever you break that down, that basically that his entire organization's growth that stemmed from campus activism grew into this major conservative fundraising media hub on the back of Trump's success. And if you ever watched Kirk talk about it, like he went on Gavin Newsom's podcast, and they were talking about that, actually, just how Turning Point USA had risen into the stardom that it had grown into. And one of the things that the thing that he basically said was, yeah, well, we did it, because of Trump. And what was interesting and what separates Kirk from basically every other pundit that's alive today is basically up to the point before his death, he was kind of starting to turn the tide, if you will. He was kind of starting to back down and change his mind and swerve more into basically not anti-Trump, but just more like not in full alignment. And you saw this in several cases. I mean, one of the things that I distinctly remember was Kirk had spent time supporting Trump's navigation of the Iran attack, initially supporting the release of the Epstein files, and where we finally saw a bit of a crack in Kirk's resolve in his support for Trump was on the Epstein files, because he was really big about having them released. And whenever Trump was like, "Oh, we need to let that go," Kirk kind of didn't just say, "Yeah, we need to let it go." He was like, "I don't want to talk about it anymore," which wasn't, to anyone who wasn't watching how much he was always in support of Trump, it was, for the first time ever, a step back and kind of away from it. But I think it's worth that's worth noting, okay? Because some of the other things that we should talk about is, I mean, there was and still is a ton of financial incentives for Turning Point USA, for example, to align with Trump. And if you think about it, that's why they're all still in like full backing of Trump. That's why Trump came on stage, even though his messaging was basically in full contrary to what a lot of people on Turning Point had said. Not all, because of course they brought on Stephen Miller and they brought on some of the more crazy, hard MAGA people that are just batshit crazy people. But if you look at Turning Point's, I guess revenue, right? So their revenue, much of their revenue is coming from donations or digital media engagements that are connected to MAGA. The entire, basically Kirk's entire platform, right, where his podcast and all of his speaking, all of that was monetized, and it was tied to his profile as a Trump-aligned influencer, right? And then it wasn't just that he was ideologically tied to Trump. It was that he was materially rewarded, okay? All of Turning Point's growth, right? Kirk's personal brand and the influence, all of that grew because he was in lockstep with Trump's political momentum. So, that's kind of enough about Turning Point. Because Turning Point is not the only example. It's just it's just probably the largest example that there is out there. Some of the other ones that you'll see, this is particularly on social media, is in kind of the alt media space, is the gentleman that runs, I can't remember, the gentleman that runs the cat turd Twitter, and it's very interesting. His name is Philip Buchanan, and it's kind of the same thing. Like him, Philip Buchanan, Matt Walsh is even probably a part of that. Some figures on the Daily Wire probably align with it. You look at Benny Johnson. Benny Johnson is another one. These people were like Daily Wire was at the point of failing at the end of the Biden era, and then at the rise of the Trump era, they kind of had a bit of a resurgence. They dropped some people And so overall, what you wound up with is the basically an the right wing media space, the right wing alt media space is basically entirely made up of people that will never, have never, are going to never turn their back on the administration. And I find it really interesting that you have an entire media sphere that is built on being nothing but loyalist. And I don't understand. I guess I fail to understand how these people go from the idea that they're free thinkers or that they're basically anti-government whenever they are just in full, like, unfettered lockstep with what the government is doing, regardless of if it aligned with their previous stances. Because you see it constantly where the MAGA, especially the MAGA pundits, where they will say one thing and then Trump will say something else, and then they'll immediately switch stances to whatever it is that Trump said. And to me, it's just crazy that anybody gives them any credibility because that's what they do. One of the things that we're going to talk about, I guess, like later on in the episode, is we're going to go and I want to bring up something that came to light just in the last couple of days. If you hadn't seen, Twitter added geolocating to accounts, so you could find out where accounts were posting from. And while it wasn't really that a lot of the, I guess, true MAGA pundits are not from the United States, there was a good number of them that their accounts aren't based out of here. That you see accounts that are based out of Nigeria, you see accounts that are based out of India, you see accounts that are based out of insane, like, places that are nowhere near the United States. And so it was kind of shocking to see that, as it turned out, like, none of these people were actually U.S. citizens, not actually from the United States. And how crazy is that? But we'll come back to that. The next thing I wanted to talk about was so we had the Turning Point USA, of course, and then I talked a bit about Philip Bouchard, and we're going to talk a bit about Benny Johnson. But one of the things that I do find kind of, like, again, it's just really surprising to me. Excuse me. Shocking to me, if you will, is the number of people that basically switched sides. Okay, so people like Benny Johnson, people like Cat Turd, Philip Buttigieg, these people, Kirk before his death, Matt Walsh, these people are going to basically unapologetically always be aligned because their source of fame, their rise to, like, success and fame is built on basically being Trump supporters. What I find interesting, though, is that there are people that basically switched sides. So people like, for example, like Kayla McKinney, Jeffrey Lord, Scotty Nell Hughes, and Carl Higbee. So these are people that were politically aligned to be anti-Trump, that then switched sides to be pro-Trump because it was, career-wise, it was good for them. So I get kind of surprised that people can follow those type of people. Albeit I can understand that, the logic of switching sides whenever it's politically beneficial, whenever it's career beneficial, or right, the alternative is that they did actually change their minds, which I think is a perfectly viable thing, right? If somebody changes their mind, I don't think that inherently that brings in the question of, well, why did you change your mind? And I say that because I say that from a position of they need to at least have a reason for why they changed their mind. Because one thing that I find really interesting is whenever you watch debates with some of these people, or which not all those people that I named do debates, but if you watch debates with some of these people, whenever they're asked, well, why did you change your mind on this? They'll go, oh, I don't know. I just felt like The most common answer, I just felt like Trump was right. Or the most common answer that you tend to see is, well, because the people on the left were really mean to me. Those both of those reasons are garbage. But I think that if you have a legitimate reason for why you change your mind, I think that it's good. I think it's good to be flexible in your stances, as long as you're able to back up your logic or your reason. Now, granted, if you're a MAGA at this point, if you're a MAGA minded person, I don't understand. I don't understand. Judicially, I don't understand. I mean, it's just like, culturally, I don't understand. Like, all of it is just counter to American culture. It's counter to good morals. It's counter to the American law. I don't like, it doesn't hold any basis to me other than you're just an absolute loyalist. Either you're stubborn and unwilling to admit you're wrong, or like for these pundits, the success of your success is built upon the people that are basically just being a Trump supporter. So that's the next part that I guess I want to get into is whenever we talk about like status, identity, and motivations, and then we look at MAGA supporters, because some of these people, okay, so one of the things Cambridge University had basically an article that came out that basically argues that support for Trump and among his base is more about like pure material self-interest and more about status than it is anything else. Because Trump supporters, they often see their political behavior as a way to reclaim a sense of honor or status that they felt like they've lost. So that was the big thing about like the Make America Great Again slogan, right? Or America First slogan. And it's why people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, or why people like Charlie Kirk, why these people kind of bought into this ideology, and is why a lot of people probably buy into this ideology, because they feel like, and whether or not this is interesting, whether or not they feel like whether it is true doesn't matter. It's about what they feel like is true. Because if we look at you can't argue against the fact that inflation there was inflation during Biden's term. You can, however, point out that the inflation the United States dealt with was substantially less than globally. Like that's just a statistical fact. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. People would go to the grocery store and they would see their groceries cost more, and as a result, they blamed Biden for it. And Trump was able to kind of capitalize on that. And now look where we are. Everything's even more expensive. But we're not going to get into that. I think it's worth pointing out that for some of these people, there is this concept of lost honor, right? Or they feel like America has been lost. And so what they are trying to do is they're trying to use, like, Trump is the catalyst by which they feel like they can reclaim it. I was watching a debate today with Destiny and Counterpoints. It was on what's that guy's name? West? I can't. I'm going to say it wrong. I'm going to say it wrong a whole bunch, and I'm going to have to go pull it up, and I'm going to be mad because it's going to be like super, super not great. What is it? Wick, I think is, yes. So they're on Wick, and they're all debating. There's I think 4 panelists, and then Wick normally moderates. And Counterpoints brings his stance forward, which is basically just that Trump is not the disease, he is the symptom of the disease. And that the reason why someone like Trump came into power is because he lists out a bunch of symptoms. So he lists out, for example, income inequality. He brings out which stems from people like being unable to buy homes. He brings out several examples of why Americans don't feel like America today is what America was. And that as a result, that's why people would basically come forth and vote for Trump. And so that kind of goes hand in hand with this point, right, from the Cambridge paper, that Trump support, that, like I said, the Trump supporters, they aligned with Trump because they feel like they've lost something. And in their mind, Trump was the means by which they would reattain that. So they bring up specifically, they bring it up like this: that status politics is deeply symbolic, and that it's about recognition, identity, and respect, not just policy. And I actually think that's, if you take that into account, that's got to be kind of on point, because policy-wise, Trump has no policies, right? He doesn't pass laws. He writes executive orders. The goes to battle with the courts over it. He doesn't actually like coalesce Congress. He doesn't bring the legislative branch together to pass laws to create lasting change, right? That was something that Biden was extremely good at. That was definitely something that Obama was really good at. But Trump, by and large, doesn't have policies at all. And so that's where I think that's why I think he's so effective, is because it's not about the policies that Trump is able to put forward. It's really about the recognition, and it's about basically, he's charismatic, and he's able to bring out this idea that we're going to bring America, we're going to go back. We're going to bring America back. Everything's going to go back. We're going to bring people out, and we're going to change, and everything's going to be great again. So moving on. So the motivations of Trump supporters. So this was actually a study that was done by the Russell Sage Foundation Journal. And it basically found that there's like a perceived status loss, right? That's what we were just talking about, real or symbolic. And it drove a lot of Trump support, because many Trump supporters felt that they were behind, right? And it was through rapid, again, this is something that Counterpoints also talked about. There's rapid social and economic change, and that they saw Trump as someone that recognized them, and that he was going to fight for their status. So, and then there is the extremist and political violence. So research actually showed that a non-trivial subset of self-identified MAGA Republicans endorse political violence, which basically suggests that for some, support is not just ideological, but is tied to a more militant and existential view of political struggle. And that basically that kind of commitment it's hard for them to walk back, right? So this is something that actually also came up in that debate. Everything is existential for MAGA. Everything, right? Everything is about this idea that they are trying to. I say that the political left is trying to steal. They're going to, like Matt Walsh does this every day on Twitter, where he'll just go on Twitter and he'll just be all like, all they want to do is kill you. They just want to wipe. Like, everything is existential. They want to wipe out your life. They hate you. They hate your family. They want to see you dead. Everything is existential. And so that's kind of, whenever everything is existential, then of course political violence becomes the outlet by which it really becomes the only tool that you have in your toolbox if everything is existential. And MAGA as a whole is really good at, that's what they do. Everything is existential. Even Trump, everything is like right now, right? I talked about it in my short earlier this week, where right now Trump is basically saying that the Democrats coming out and saying, if you're in the military, or the intelligence community, you don't have to follow illegal orders. And Trump is like, that's seditious, kill them all, which is insane for a couple of reasons. One, what they're saying is true. They don't have to follow illegal orders, which honestly, if you think about it, it's a bit of a self-report for Trump to say that they're telling the military and intelligence community that they don't have to listen to me. That's not what they said. They said they don't have to follow illegal orders, so you're kind of self-reporting that the orders you're giving are illegal, I guess. But moving further on, the real thing there is that it's existential, right? They're trying to overthrow the government. They're trying to say that the military doesn't have to listen to the commander in chief, and then all the pundits get on board, and they're all in full support of it, and on and on and on. And so everything that they talk about is this nonstop existential threat to their livelihood, to their families, and like the research shows, it's really difficult to walk something like that back, right? How do you go from they're trying to kill you, they're trying to kill your family, to okay, no, they're not actually. Like, there's no walk back for that, right? So that the pundits have to stick to it. That's why Matt Walsh, he can never go back. He can never, ever, ever again, because he's constantly been raising the bar. He's been constantly pushing forth they're trying to kill you and murder you and your entire family for so long that there is no turning the clock backwards and undoing that. And so this is why and Cat Turd's the same way. Again, that guy's name is Philip. What was it? Philip Buchechin. Okay, he's the same way. Pretty much all of the MAGA pundits are like this. Everything is existential, and so there is no critiquing. There's no being critical of the president. There is like nothing. And again, that's not to say there are people that were MAGA that have started being critical. Marjorie Taylor Greene, of course. Kirk, before his death, started being critical about things. Laura Loomer, hands down. I mean, she flip-flops sometimes, but she can be very critical of the president. Granted, Laura Loomer, some of these people are crazy, or well, now they're either dead or crazy. But then you also have Republicans. No, because that doesn't really fall. I was going to say you do have Republicans that are against Trump, but they don't really fall into the category of being pundits that are in support of the president that are now critical of it. If you really just look at every major MAGA pundit online, none of them are ever critical of the president, and so they have no credibility, right? They're just loyalists. They're not ever going to question, critique, be like that. Like that's one of the things that drives me crazy about the Democratic Party sometimes is one of the things that the Republican Party is really good at, is that they are able to constantly maintain this lockstep alignment with whatever the president wants to do. Whereas as Democrats, we're willing to be critical of our leaders. We're willing to be critical of each other. And as a result, we wind up being kind of almost infighting a lot. But I would say it makes us more morally honest, because now we're not loyalists to a faction or loyalist to a leader. We are like an actual like liberally ideologic kind of group. Like I always say I kind of summarize all that by always saying, well, we're the big tent, right? We're the big tent people. So moving on. So the next thing that I've got for notes is the media trust and feedback loop. So the Pew Research basically came forward and showed that within the Republican base, that approval of Trump is closely linked to distrust in mainstream media. Now, some of this has changed, now, because Trump's approval rating is in the dirt. And so some of this might be older research that I pulled through, but basically it shows that, whenever media criticism of Trump rises, that it seems that many in the base tend to double down, basically in full backing of him, because they see all criticism of him as being biased or unfair, and basically that the distrust the distrust is fueled by the media ecosystem. And that it's funny because the notes that I that I wrote out, right, I noticed that they talked about podcasters, and I just thought, like, maybe, I mean, most of the podcasts, especially the all-media podcasts, you look at someone like Tim Pool, for example, who I would argue is probably, no, Tim Pool is definitely, I mean, Tim Pool is almost more or less a Russian asset at this point. But one of the things that he's the same way. He's just a Trump loyalist. He'll never be critical of the president, pretty much ever. And he'll always be very, very critical of the left. So I thought it was interesting that they talk about podcasters quite a bit, but at the same time, it's probably talking about left-wing podcasters, because the right-wing podcasters and the right-wing TV and the social media, I mean, all of that is basically just going to reinforce Trump. I mean, we look at what happened I'm sorry, I have a tattoo on my arm and it is really itchy. And so every once in a while I just gotta, like, I put lotion on it and just gotta make sure that, because the lotion, like, it's stuck on my elbow and it makes my elbow itchy. Sorry. Okay. So one of the things that you'll see is the right-wing media will basically come along and coalesce around Trump. And which I guess is counter to what I was just saying, because I'm looking at it from the perspective of whenever it says that oh, never mind, I understand what it's saying now. So so back up. It's what I wrote this down, and you would think that I would keep track of what it is that I meant. So basically what the Pew Research showed is that the distrust in mainstream media fuels the media ecosystem, the right-wing media ecosystem, which includes podcasters, right-wing TV, and social media. Okay. Now I'm tracking what it meant and what I wrote down, which basically reinforces Trump-aligned narratives. Yes. And then in turn, that benefits those networks. Okay. So you've got things like, right. So I'm so sorry. You would think the way I wrote it is this distrust fuels a media ecosystem. And I was like, and then I see everything said, and I'm like, why would I write that? So basically what it means is that whenever legacy media is critical of Trump, then the right-wing media profits from that. And as a result, the right-wing media will never be critical of Trump. Because it's almost, and I would actually look at it like this, it's almost like people that are basically extreme Trump supporters, they are unwilling to hear any criticism of him. So if the media becomes critical of him, then they will just go and watch something else that supports what it is that they want to hear. So kind of the opposite of what I was talking about earlier. Like I said, I tend to watch a lot of right-wing media. It's pretty maddening. My mom thinks it's very shocking that I do this because she can't stand it. I do it because I often want to hear what they say. And yes, I guess in a way I am kind of like rage baiting myself. And, maybe that's not healthy for me, but I can stand it, so I do it. It is something to be said that you can go and watch what they say. No, sorry. It is something to be said that people will often hear something that's counter to what it is that they want to believe, and then that will kind of push them to go and watch people that say what they want to believe. And so, yeah, that's honestly, if you think about it, and I'm sorry, my brain's going a million miles a minute. If you think about it, that kind of explains why so much disinformation is able to be propagated so rapidly, is because the right-wing media essentially profits from that misinformation, because people don't want to hear the opposite of what they want to believe. So for example, if people believe that vaccines cause autism, or if people believe that the 2020 election was rigged, or if people believe whatever, that, I don't know, pick a topic that has been in the main, that basically has been pushed all the way through the full dis and misinformation cycle. All of those things, you would hear the mainstream media reporting like, oh, actually that's not true, but people want it to be true, so then they just go watch right-wing media, and that right-wing media reinforces that belief. And so as a result, the right-wing media sphere will continue to propagate whatever it is, because that's what they're doing. They're trying to push that through. And so, this is where it goes to what it creates a feedback loop, right? Because pundits echo Trump's worldview and they gain an audience, and then the base listens because they mistrust traditional media, and then the pundits monetize off of that audience, and then the pundits basically defend Trump because his continued relevance sustains their business and influence. So yeah, no, I'm so glad. Maybe if I had read further in my notes, I would have been able to be like, where was I going whenever I wrote all this down? That's where I was going, as we were coming back into the feedback loop, and that's kind of what it is that brings it around. So we're coming up on 40 minutes, or I guess a little over 40 minutes. This is just one of those things that if you pay attention to right-wing media and you listen to what it is, you do kind of just go, I mean, do these guys ever disagree? And the answer is no. Like if they are high up in the right-wing, like alt media space at all, like again, like your Tim Pools, your Benny Johnsons, your Turning Point USA, all of these companies, people, businesses, They built their entire identity, all of their success is built on supporting and or endorsing Trump and his administration. And so they're never going to be critical. They're never going to be honest. They're never going to do anything that would make it where their viewers, their listeners, their audience is going to go, "Oh, well, now I don't want to listen to you because you don't support Trump." And I just think it's one of those things where how long does that, like, that's in my head, it's unsustainable. Right? You have to be able to speak authentically and believe the things, in my opinion, and in some way believe the things that you're saying, especially in the alt media space, if you want to have lasting success. Because one of the reasons why you see drop-offs in some of the, I mean, you can just look back, not even 10 years, but if you look back 5 years, I mean, some of the people that were big YouTubers 5 years ago aren't as big today because they kind of changed their views. I mean, you look at I guess one of the more recent ones that dropped I was just, oh man, I just watching I watched a lot of Turkey Tom. If you're not familiar with who that is, Turkey Tom it's a YouTube channel. He basically does video essays on like streamers and YouTubers. And he talks about the rise and fall of a lot of them. And if you watch a lot of the rise and fall videos on that, it's because these people, they rise because of a certain type of behavior that they either, good, or generally if they rise and fall, it's because their success was built on a bad behavior. But it's because they weren't able to shift and adjust to create more more content, whether the content's entertaining or informative or whatever the case. And so that's what that is what I feel like is likely to happen with a lot of these, Trump supporters, is they're out here and they're going to be full backbone support, like full backing and support for the president. And then what happens whenever Trump leaves office or passes away, or we couldn't get so lucky? What happens then to them? They're all of their relevancy is only built upon basically the status of the current administration, which is in power. So to me, it becomes one of those like completely unsustainable things. So anyways, this is, I did bring up some counter arguments and complexity. And this is just so I had a little bit of balance. So one of the things that I think is worth noting is that some of the pundits might privately disagree with Trump's tactics or rhetoric, but publicly they're going to stay loyal because there's too much pressure or risk for them, which basically means that, or points out the fact that not all loyalty is ideological and that some of them might actually be a little more pragmatic. This was proven to be true in certain cases, right? Kyle Rittenhouse, for example, back before Trump was reelected, one of the things that Rittenhouse had mentioned or had spoken about was basically just that he didn't agree with the president on a particular topic. And then a lot of the right-wing online pundits at the time basically came out and were like, "No, Kyle, stop." And kind of, pulled him aside privately and were like, "Look, we understand that you disagree, but you've got to support Trump." And you even see this sometimes whenever you hear them talk about certain topics on their podcast, where they'll be talking about a topic and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, I don't really agree with the president on that. I don't really agree with him on this or that or the other thing." And sometimes I'm like shocked because it's like, you don't agree with him on anything. And then you go, "So it doesn't sound like you agree with him on anything." And they're like, "Yeah, there's a lot I don't like, but you'd still vote for him?" I'm like, "Oh, absolutely." And that's the one that flabbergasted me the most. But it goes kind of hand in hand with that thing where that not all loyalty is ideological and that some of them might be pragmatic. So the next thing was donor networks. So as Trump ages or eventually steps back, which again, we're already kind of starting to see this a little bit right now because they're like trying to make Vance the next MAGA guy. You're basically going to see an emergence of donor circles. So like the Rockbridge Network is an example of that, right? Where they're trying to build a lasting MAGA coalition, which basically suggests that that while pundits are deeply invested in Trump right now, some are planning for the future or beyond him, but even then, their strategy is strategically is a continuity of his ideology, not his reputation. So, and then finally I had the last one, which was identity over policy. So for many, Trumpism is less about specific policies and more about symbolic political rebellion. So even if Trump were out of power, the movement might persist through the personal ties of Trump, although the personal ties of Trump are very strong. This is something I talk about in Trump 1. America was basically in this era of like anti-establishment. That's why Bernie Sanders at the time was a very, very popular person, was because he was very anti-establishment. It's arguably, but why Mamdani it was so popular in New York was because he was anti-establishment. And I think as we start to see more anti-establishment representatives, whether they be local representatives or federal representatives, I think we're going to see a big shift to those, because a lot of people aren't content with the status quo. I would just be curious, though. This is something that I found interesting. I had a conversation with one of my friends the other day where we were talking about, well, why does the status quo exist and what is the status quo? And one of the things that we pointed out whenever we were talking about the status quo, if you will, is that the status quo came into existence on the back of a lot of lessons learned. So, for example, vaccines was where the topic really started. And if you kind of look at the polio vaccines, I guess, as the biggest one, is that polio it ran rampant through the through basically the world, and killed or maimed a lot of people. And so that's why the polio vaccine became very important. Measles was the same way. I mean, it can't, and everybody it just seems like over time people forget, because the status quo, and then people want to go against the status quo, and then basically a lot of the stuff starts to have a resurgence, and then it's like a reminder of like, oh right, that's why we did this thing. And so I just think it's pretty interesting on the big picture, that the status quo, while it is generally good to question the status quo, I feel like maybe in the modern times people don't question status quo the way that they should, because it's not questioning status quo to find a better path. It's just questioning it for the sake of being like rebellious in nature, which I think a lot of humans are. And I don't think there's necessarily anything like straight up unhealthy about it, but it's just worth noting that just because it's worth noting that the status quo exists for a reason. So anyways, this is usually about the time where we start talking about action items, where we start maybe going and checking out what is going on in the social media space. So I know right now, oh, look, see? So check it out. I'm going to switch over. We're going to switch over to share here. All right. So one of the things that I was talking about was Matt Walsh. Okay. So if you look, I don't really give a crap about I don't really give a crap about what it is that Matt Walsh talks about. What I find really interesting is if you just let's just look at not his post, but let's look at like his. I guess I do want to look at his post. One of the things that he tends to talk about whenever we like come down the list of stuff is everything is existential, right? Oh yeah, I did think it was funny that he's out here kind of doing the same thing that everybody was doing, and was looking at like all these conservative accounts and basically being like, oh yeah, they're not from here. So it was really interesting to see even kind of everybody getting on board. I did think it was, if you take a look, that the right-wing media was looking at left-wing media and basically saying, oh look, they're not even from here. And that if you look, and that the left wing was looking at right-wing media and kind of doing the same thing. I don't know why I thought that was amusing at the time. I still think it's amusing that basically both sides of the aisle were an equal part using this feature, which they took away, which they took out, by the way, at this point. But they were all that everybody was using this feature as like a method to basically refute the other side. I thought that was interesting. I want to get down because again, this is I may not find it, but everything that Matt Walsh talks about is existential, and so as a result, that's the following that Matt Walsh has basically found, and because that's the following that Matt Walsh has found, he will never backtrack that. This was another one that's interesting. Like, Catcher's the same way. He's not going to walk back anything he says for the same reason. Yeah, so this is what I was talking about too. So look at this. This is funny. So he says, I think we're all figuring out that almost all of our trolls are foreigners pretending to be Americans. And then this guy shows that most of these like big MAGA accounts, they're not even from the United States either. MAGA army from South Asia. You could probably argue. Oh, right. I forgot. This one was the big one. So Mary Tiles, Texas is a really big MAGA account and was based out of Russia. I thought I was like, oh, wow. That's pretty damning. And this was true kind of on both sides, right? If you go, and I think this feeds back into that theory that like we had foreign interest in basically kind of trying to divide the United States, and I think it's kind of proven itself to be true. So this was one of the things that I talked about this week was Trump having his fun little meltdown over the Democrats. I just want to be very clear. What the Democrats said on that video was not illegal at all. Because they weren't saying you don't have to listen to the president. They were saying you don't have to follow illegal orders. And I've pointed out before that some of the orders that the president has given were not illegal. I say some because the courts have proven that some were, but not every order that the president has given has been an illegal order. And so I think it's, again, kind of a self-report that Trump is saying, they told him not to follow my orders. It's like, bro, not every order that you've given is an illegal order. So, anyways, let's get into what we kind of always talk about. So, once we get close to the end of the episode, I talk about action items. Mostly, like I said, there's not really any action items today, but I do want to just walk down our normal path where we talk about how can you get politically involved. So there's a number of ways you can get politically involved. And probably the most popular one is 5Calls. So 5Calls is an app on your phone. What you do is you put in your name, you put in where you live. I'll see if I can actually show it today, because sometimes, yeah, you can't. Kind of see it. So sometimes, sorry, let me pull up some of these other ones. But basically what you do is you're able to put in where you're from. And once you put in where you're from, you can then come and, I'm getting up all these other ones. Okay, I got them. Okay. You put in where you're from, you put in your address, and then it gives you like a list of topics to talk about. So right now it's like one of these is protect state level AI regulation. And then it gives kind of a breakdown, right? So it says in June, Republicans attempted to add language to H.R. 1, the one big beautiful bill act to prohibit state governments from making or enforcing any laws regulating artificial intelligence for the next 10 years. And then it says, like, the provision was stripped from the bill before passage, but now House Republicans have renewed their effort to block all state-level AI regulation by introducing it as an amendment to the annual must-pass National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA, in December. And then it gives a breakdown of how they're going to do it, and then it basically gives you a list of who your representatives are. So, like, I'm from Texas, and so it lists out John Cornyn and Ted Cruz. And so if I click on this, it gives me like a script, and it gives me the phone number. So there's like a link for his phone number on here that I can click, and I could click the link and it will call his office, and then it gives me a script that I can read. So like it says, "Hi, my name is Aaron, and I'm a constituent from blank. I'm calling to demand Senator Corrin oppose any legislative provision that blocks state-level regulation of AI. Congress should be working to protect our safety and privacy from unknown risk of AI, not prioritizing the self-serving needs of big tech corporations and billionaire CEOs. Thank you for your time and consideration." And then that's it. And then it even has a note here, and this is the biggest note. It says, "If leaving voicemail, please leave full street address to ensure your call is tallied." So one of the things that I tell people is calling is hands down the best way to contact your representatives. If you contact your representatives, but you don't want to talk to someone, because you don't have to, if the office is closed on weekends and it's open from 7 in the morning to 7 at night, if you call any other time, right, you'll get somebody. But if you call after, before 7 or after 7, you'll go to voicemail. If you leave a voicemail, you have to leave your full street address. I'm going to say it again. If you leave a voicemail, you have to leave your full street address. Okay. The reason that's important is they won't tally it if you don't have it. So you got to make sure to leave your address. So calling is the most effective way. If you call, you don't have to talk to someone. You can call after hours and leave a voicemail. Super effective way to get through. So that's again, 5 calls is great. It's fantastic. You just snap on your phone. Boom, boom, boom. You call, you leave a message. Excellent. You're done. Now, the next one that I want to talk about is the card campaign. Okay, so the card campaign, basically the way this works is they give you these cards. There's 2 ways. I'm sorry. Again. There's 2 ways. One way is that you can just come on here and you can literally just print it out yourself, right? Like I can save this, I can print it. You can do that, or you can do the text version where it gives you all the text and you can print this. Or you can order cards from them, right? You can order printed cards. They have a certain price depending on how much you order. And then you can basically just leave these behind somewhere, okay? They give you a lot of cards to choose from, and they all have different all of it is just information for people, whether it's talking about immigration, whether it's talking about women's rights, whether it's talking about, the Affordable Care Subsidies, whether it's talking about Project 2025, whatever the case is, they got cards. They also have really useful, handy distribution guides. Okay, for introverts, for extroverts, for in between introverts. So all of these have very great ways that you can do it. Check it out, card campaign. I want to note that none of these places have endorsed us. These are just tools to get engaged politically, right? At whatever level that you're capable of getting engaged in. The next one that we always talk about is the 50-50. 50-51 and indivisible, because they kind of go hand in hand. Some people, they want to get out there, right? They want to get out there. They want to protest. Fantastic. If that's what you want to do, absolutely go and do it. These are the websites that you can utilize in order to get out there and protest. So 50-51 and indivisible. They basically talk about it all the time. Indivisible, I think, even goes as far as like boycotts, right? So you can see one here is like cancel Spotify for whatever. So if you walk down, they've got basically tons of ways that you can get politically involved, kind of physically, okay? And what's nice about both of them is that, let's say you live somewhere where there's not an event going, you can actually go on these websites and you can create your own event. And then people can sign up for your event, and then you become the host of the event. So check them out. It's 50-51 and 50-50.1 and indivisible.org. Both great resources if you want to get out there and get protesting. And then last but not least, I can't not talk about it, is the Unfuck America tour. So this is a tour that's basically following it's using the success that Turning Point USA found. They go out to college campuses and they engage with people on the ground level, and they get into conversations and they have debates with them. Of course, Destiny is there. Amy Zellmer, Andrew J.D., Ben Shapiro, he's another great one. Camp Callout, she's fantastic. Chelsea Gods, Corey Mager. I love Dom Henderson. Then who's the other one? Hunter Kozak. He was in the debate. I just watched today. He's fantastic. Kyla Turner, if you like Not So Erudite, fantastic. Madeline Somerville. Who else they got? Oliver Naheas, really good. Z Sanchez. Where's my guy? Oh yeah, there he is. Soy Pill. Niels Gradall. I didn't know his name was Niels, but yeah, the Soy Pill. So again, some really great content creators out there that you should go and check out. It's fantastic stuff. If you can't make it to one of their events, you can always come in here. And I'm a merch guy. I like buying merch. So they have so it's really simple Unfuck America Tour merch. It's good. It's fantastic. They got stickers, they got hats, they got it all. And so you can come and get one of these. You can also volunteer. And of course, as always, you can just straight up donate. So, and you can see they've raised a good amount of money, and that's basically what they're trying to do. They're trying to keep it going. So any of those that's just another great way for you to get out there and get involved. So, and last but not least, and this is not, I don't need a share card for this. One of the most effective ways that you can get involved, besides calling, of course. Excuse me again. I'm so sorry. One of the, or probably the most effective is locally. So we talk about it all the time, especially around this holiday season. You can get out, and there's tons of things that you can do locally that are basically forms of resistance that aren't as active, if you will. One of the things I always tell people is that I fundamentally disagree with Charlie Kirk on pretty much everything, but there was one thing that we agreed on, and that's that people have a tough time. The people nowadays, they don't really care about each other. And so one of the things that I think we should be trying to do nationally is we should be trying to care about each other more. We should be trying to kind of show that care through through engaging. And so one of the ways that you can engage is you could do something local, like you can go and donate to a food what's the word? I'm thinking soup kitchen. You can go and work at a soup kitchen. You can go and donate to like a food shelter. I know that the tattoo shop that I go to, they're doing like a food drive. And so remember, those are all great ways for you to be like involved in your community. It's like a form of community activism, and that on its own is a form of resistance. And that's something that I highly encourage people to do, because getting involved and caring about your community is probably the biggest thing that you have in your arsenal to kind of resist the hate and fear that is currently being utilized and espoused by the administration of the United States. And so it's never think that you have to call your national representative, and never think that you have to do the car campaign, that you have to go out and protest. There is basically nothing too small that you could go out and do that wouldn't in some way create a little more light in the world. And that creation of light it goes further than I think people realize. So that is it for today. We ran a little over an hour. I appreciate everybody that hopped in. I appreciate everybody that watches, and hopefully I'll be back a little more active. Things are crazy, the holidays, and then I got some really crazy real life stuff going on. And all that being said, I want to try and be here every Sunday talking about something. And maybe sometimes we'll just come on and we'll just go wander around aimlessly and find something to talk about. But usually I try to have a topic prepared. I try to think about it during the week and have something for you guys whenever we get on here on Sunday. So I'm on every Sunday. I start between 3 and 4. I generally start around 3:30-ish. But it just depends on what I've got a big, I've got my wife and we have 4 children. So it's really just whatever my schedule allows. It's just, we're all on the same page that between 3 and 4 o'clock every Sunday, I make time to come here and talk about, these topics, because I'm passionate about the United States and protecting our country. So anyways, thank you all so much. And I will catch you next time. So thanks. Bye.